This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for joining us on NC Spin. The week before Thanksgiving was full of news, and we want to discuss it, beginning by asking if Governor Cooper did wrong in permitting the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We'll talk about the decision by 3 judges that candidates can't file for congressional offices when the filing period opens December 2nd, and we discuss removal of a statue in Chatham County under the cover of darkness. And of course, our panel is going to tell us something we don't know. This week's panel includes Chris Fitzsimon, director of the Newsroom, Cash Michaels, one of our favorite journalists and filmmakers, Donna Martinez for WPTF Radio and the John Locke Foundation, and John Hood, syndicated columnist and author. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Let's get started. December 2nd is the day filing for political offices and the March primary elections begin. But a court ruling by a 3-judge panel puts the filing for congressional offices on hold until the court determines the maps recently drawn by the legislature are valid. Now, the plan to meet that day to consider the maps raises big questions about whether congressional primaries will be held on March 3rd. Donna, the drop-dead date for the candidates to be able to file, according to the State Board of Elections, is December 15th. You think this 3-judge panel can approve these maps by that date?
Yes, I do, and I think that they should. The best thing that can happen on December 2nd is for the judges' panels to say, look, okay, you created this map using the same open, transparent, nonpartisan, bipartisan process you used to create the legislative maps, which we approved. Therefore, thank you for coming. This is approved. Merry Christmas. Now,
Here's your participation gift. Thank you very much.
Exactly. But the worst thing they could do is to try to say, well, we're going to go through a whole other review process and then delay the filing and, worst of all, delay that congressional
But there's
primary.
a lawsuit, Cash, that's asking them to do just exactly that, to review these maps. The plaintiffs in the case are saying, hey, you didn't go through the same kind of open process that we did with the legislative maps. If that happens, if they decide to go through a review, does that bring into question whether they can do this by December 15th or not?
The answer is yes, but I think that given how long we have gone through 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats as far as how the redistricting was done before, I think we need to take as much time as necessary to make sure we get it right for 2020.
But Chris, the objective observers say that these new maps are likely, they weren't drawn that way, intended that way, but the new maps are likely to end up with 8 Republicans and 5 Democrats as a result instead of the current 10-3 margin. Your opinion of the maps after you've had a chance to think about this?
I disagree with Donna significantly. I don't think they use the same process, which is why you saw a lot of Democrats vote against it. Remember, a lot of Democrats supported the legislative maps that were drawn by the Republican majority. They had input into it. I've talked about several times on this show. Senator Heiss kept going into a back room. We still don't know who he was talking to when he went back there. I think there are a lot of questions about the way these maps were drawn. I think the court has a lot of questions. And as frustrating as it might be if we have to move the primary date, the purpose here isn't to make sure we have the election on time. The purpose is to make sure we have fair elections.
Is this just politics, John, or are there some legitimate concerns and some reasons why the court should not approve the maps?
I think that the plaintiffs that went back into court and sued on the new maps is just purely politics. They're trying to get more Democratic seats. It's just as simple as that. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some questions that are being raised that they need an answer to, that the state or the legislative defendants will need an answer to. I would push back fairly strongly on the 8-5 assumption. I think that people jump to that conclusion prematurely. I think as you looked at the maps more closely, and I don't like some of the lack of compactness in the way the new map is drawn, particularly in the Piedmont. However, I think that the 8th and the 9th district, Richard Hudson and Dan Bishop today, I think those are competitive seats. The Democrats could win those seats, not just in a perfect year, but in a reasonably good year.
And certainly Mark Walker's seat, and also...
well, there's two of them they'll definitely gain, just because of the way they're drawn. That's the George Holdings seat and the Mark Walker seat. But I think we are discounting the fact that two of the seats are actually competitive. Even Mark Meadows' district becomes somewhat less Republican protected. But the 8th and the 9th, I mean, remember, the 9th was competitive recently.
Donna, let's play what if. What if the panel, the judges say, these maps don't pass muster? The question is, are they going to go back to the legislature to get legislators to draw more maps? Are they going to employ a special master to draw the maps? What are they going to do?
Well, they could do either one, but I think the Democrats want them to employ the special master and to start this process all over again. You know, this whole notion, though, of predetermining, well, it's going to be 8-5, it's going to be 10-3, or it should be a certain number, really discounts the whole dynamic of voting anyway. Voting isn't predetermined. It depends on candidates.
Well,
it depends on issues.
No. David Lewis said on the House floor, the only reason we drew 10 Republicans is because we couldn't draw 11.
That's right.
And that's not the way the map is anymore.
Well, but I'm saying that's what the point was.
So are you saying now that 8-5, that is what it should be?
No, I'm saying that the maps weren't done in an open process like the legislative maps were. We wouldn't be in this predicament, and most Democrats would have supported it.
And I think what most people say is, we don't care whether they're Republican districts or Democratic districts. We want them to be competitive districts and let the best candidate win.
But that's not what the plaintiffs are seeking. Right. If you look at the maps that they like, they absolutely would be more like 6 Republican, 5 Democrat, or vice versa, with no competitive seats. Their goal is not competitive seats; it's to get more Democrats.
And that's why we have a bipartisan 3-judge panel, which has had a Republican the entire time. Will make the final decision.
That's what we should do. So, Cash, then the question becomes, irrespective, if they're drawing new maps, probably can't get it done by December 15th. Now, are we just going to postpone and delay the congressional primaries or all primaries on March 3rd?
No, it'll be the congressional primaries.
So the rest of the primary elections will go forward.
Look, if you want to suppress turnout, that's the way to do it, to separate that primary out.
That was my next question.
Absolutely wrong thing to do.
Which doesn't favor either party, by the way. It's because it's the primary. That's the other. This is not the primary. Moving the primary does not help Democrats or Republicans. The turnout is suppressed, and their individual parties.
But John, most people agree with what Donna's saying here, that if they have to have a second primary election for congressional districts, voter turnout will be considerably less than what it's going to be.
Of course. In fact, we've had that recently, and that's what happened.
That typically favors incumbents.
I wouldn't jump to conclusions. This is like jumping to the conclusion that it's an 8-5 map. I think those conclusions are premature and they're oversold. There are uncertainties here. It's important not to think everything is predetermined by map drawing.
Well,
map drawing matters,
job
but
here
it's not
to
the whole
jump to conclusions. All right, round the table real quickly. What's going to happen with all of this, Chris?
I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that we'll have to move the primary.
Just to congressional?
Yes, just to congressional.
Cash.
Agreed.
Donna?
Map will be approved.
I'd say 50-50 because I'm so decisive.
Gosh, it's been so long since the two guys have agreed with each other.
I refuse to agree with him. That's why I said 50-50. He said better than 50-50.
It's been one problem after another with this proposed Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Simultaneously in announcing the Department of Environmental Quality had issued permits for the projects, we learned that there was also a $58 million discretionary fund connected to its approval. Legislators screamed that Governor Cooper was establishing a slush fund for his pet projects and redirected the funds to other areas. Now, they simultaneously, almost, hired a private investigator to determine if Governor Cooper did anything wrong. On Wednesday, the investigators released their 82-page report saying, quote, "It would be reasonable to conclude that Governor Cooper improperly used the authority and influence of his office to obtain the fund from Duke Energy and other pipeline owners." I want to ask all of you, The governor's supporters say this is much ado about nothing. Cooper didn't benefit from the mitigation fund. Republicans, on the other hand, claim criminal violations might have occurred. Is this just another example of the partisan divide in our state? What should our takeaway be? Chris?
I don't think there were criminal violations in the report, or they would have been cited. They couldn't find a statute that was criminal. I think you can argue about the way this process was handled. I would also point out the governor's chief political advisor, Ken Udy, went to the legislature voluntarily, unlike some Republicans we know in the country who won't let people testify, and has been open about this process. The report was, I think, flawed in many ways, including some facts. I think there is a significant issue we should talk about, but talking about criminal investigations, this report was done partially to find something and partially to help Dan Forrest.
You know, I detected a little bit of a zinger in there, in that answer. Donna, as far as it goes, the report says Cooper used his authority and influence improperly. How did he do that?
Well, because there was pressure over issues of solar power deals, et cetera. And for me, number one, you can have a difference of interpretation over the narrative and what people understood. And again, we've seen that at the federal level as well. But there's a dispute over fact here. The folks at Duke Energy say that there was a meeting one-on-one with the CEO of Duke and Governor Cooper, and at least based on comments that Governor Cooper made this week, he's either disputing that that meeting occurred or the interpretation of what was there.
That there was, in fact, a meeting in his office.
No, I don't believe he did.
This is why this is such a fiasco. The governor was clearly not prepared for this report. They believe their own propaganda. This is just some sort of a put-up job. The report is rather detailed. There are some questions that aren't settled by the report, but there is a very straightforward event that the head of Duke Energy, who, by the way, says that she did not feel that the permit was conditional on her giving in. I think that this is a little bit like President Zelensky saying he didn't feel blackmail from President Trump. It's the same kind of, you shouldn't necessarily take someone under duress at face value. But she says during this November 30th, 2017 meeting that Governor Cooper brought up these various issues, the pipeline, the solar energy issue, the mitigation fund issue, and some other things. And Governor Cooper denies that this happened. That is a straightforward, the governor saying that the head of Duke Energy is not telling the truth. That is by itself very troubling.
Well, he says the facts are on his side. Is this pay to play?
No, he says nothing happened. He says this is a quote-unquote
something obviously happened.
Partisan circus. He did nothing wrong. If they cannot cite chapter and verse as to exactly what crime he committed.
Chris, as far as it goes, what is it that got the legislature so upset here? Was it the fund was set up, or did it have to do with the fact that some of the fund was to be going to solar companies to connect to the Duke Power grid, and our legislative leadership has a long history of not liking solar?
I think it's both of those things. I think they see it as a separation of power issue, whether the governor has the authority to do that, which we should argue about and talk about, not send somebody to claim that somebody needs the FBI to investigate them. And I also think they do have, whether it's, I think it's misguided, but I do think they have a lot of hostility toward solar power and renewable energy and the state playing any role in that. So I think it's a combination of those things, and it's an election year, and I think they already know that their candidate, the likely candidate for the Republicans, is well behind in the polls.
So, John, what's happened to this $58 million fund?
There is no fund because the pipeline hasn't proceeded because of unrelated matters.
Now, I saw you patting Chris's hand like that was a bless your heart pat.
Bless your heart.
No, she was agreeing with me.
If the governor says the facts, that didn't happen, the facts are on his side, how are we going to know then what his version of the facts are unless there are more questions asked?
Well, you know,
now,
Ken Udy's
I'm
already
waiting
appeared
to hear.
before the
I wanted
legislature.
to hear
They refuse to let the other people appear that have direct knowledge of the story. Look, if you read the 82-page report,
haven't we seen this movie before?
We have, and it was. I think it was very interesting. This happened at the same time that there was a quid pro quo investigation going on.
Yeah, at the same time that Phil Berger was calling that a witch hunt too.
I agree that there's partisan hypocrisy on these issues. My point is, this is a very real question. Do we want the governor, on the basis of no legal authority, to deny or delay or even suggest that there's a problem with a permit involving criteria that are not in the law, obviously to pressure a private company to do what he wants.
So you believe there was pay to play involved in this?
I do not think that. I do not think.
Well,
businesses have to know.
It's $58 million.
Businesses have to know there's no pay to
It's not
play.
a personal gain argument. The argument is he had two groups in his coalition that didn't like the pipeline. The Eastern North Carolina interests were arguing that there should be subsidized access to the pipeline for some companies and farms. The solar energy folks, environmental folks didn't want the pipeline to happen at all. He wanted to placate those groups by getting these concessions from Duke. It's very obvious what happened. The governor's defenses are not good, but at least the governor's staff had a better defense. He actually blew their defense up. Their argument was, of course, we talked about all these issues together, but only in the context of coordinating the announcement. Cooper denies there were a conversation at all. That's why this is a bit of a fiasco right now.
Businesses have to know that North Carolina is not engaging in any sort of pay-to-play for environmental permits.
What's the pay part?
I don't
What's the
know.
Pay part?
The pay is they had to give $58 million to get the permit.
$100 million to his political allies and $58 million under his personal control. It's not arguing that Roy Cooper was going to pocket the money himself, but obviously there was a pay-to-play suggestion.
So, Cash, what's the intended outcome here? I'm trying to, after the investigation and so forth like that, are they trying to get rid of the mitigation fund? Are they trying to rescind the permit? Or are they just taking a stab at Cooper?
They're taking a stab at Cooper. That's number one. I don't care what's being discussed here. They want to stop Cooper from being reelected because they don't like Cooper. I don't understand why, of the whole list that you've given, you did not list that as number one. They don't want Cooper reelected.
We should be concerned about the permitting process. That should be a fair, neutral process, divorced from politics and politicians.
About that. Let's have legislative hearings and call people in. Are we going to get to the point? They
refused to come.
Did they subpoena them? If they subpoenaed people in the past, number one. Number two, are we going to have a time? Are we getting to the point where one political party is going to use state dollars to hire private investigators to investigate the other political party?
Why do you think they had to do that?
Because they didn't want to issue subpoenas. They have the power to do that, John. They've done it before at the legislative building.
They had to have investigators because the existing entities were not going to investigate this. If this was a Republican governor, I guarantee you this would be front page news for weeks. The Democrats would be blowing.
Now, right?
Media is part of the problem.
The media is the problem.
No, I said they're part of the problem. They have done a good job on this story, but this would be a much bigger deal if it was a Republican governor. The Attorney General's office would have a different interest in this story. I think this is a serious story. I don't think it's Watergate or anything like that. I think it is a serious story that has been underplayed because of partisan bias.
You got the Republicans got headlines all over every media outlet in the state that said Governor Cooper improperly used his influence. That was a headline in every outlet I saw across.
The headline actually was said initially before they changed it was Governor used improper use by an NCGOP investigation, which was a false statement. That's how much the bias is.
Why is that a false statement?
Well,
the Republican legislature, the legislature paid for it.
Party organized an investigation.
No, the Republican legislative leaders, and then Dan Forrest issued a call for the FBI to get involved. Give me a break.
The votes regarding doing an investigation of this were not just by Republicans.
Look, bottom line is Governor Cooper says the facts are on his side. We have a factual dispute here. We can't just let that continue. You have to continue to find out who's telling the truth. And if it's the governor...
I actually think the governor will walk back his claim that the conversation didn't happen because it's preposterous.
I'm thinking that we probably aren't going to have this group around the Thanksgiving table next week. In the dark of night, early Wednesday, the statue that stood for more than 100 years in front of the Chatham County Courthouse was dismantled. As word spread that night, a crowd of about 75 watched the removal of the Confederate statue. It had been the source of protest, violence, and divisiveness for many months. To many, it was a painful reminder of slavery, racism, and an ugly time in our history. For others, it was a tribute to the many who died in the Civil War. In 2015, the legislature recognized the growing angst and controversy about these statues and passed a law making it illegal to move any historical monument unless it was for reasons of historic preservation or public safety. They gave decision-making, by the way, to the State Historical Commission. So far, it appears that body has pretty much punted on this. Cash, in many respects, the drama over these Confederate statues is evidence of the racial divide in our state that still exists. What's it going to take for people of goodwill to resolve these problems?
To answer your question quickly, but then to follow it up,
then that will be not so quick. Go ahead.
These statues belong not in the public square, and I'll explain why, but in museums. because if folks want, that's where we go to remember history, to pay tribute to history, to teach our children history. It strikes me that many years ago, Tom, we had signs up saying whites only, blacks only.
Remember those days.
And we removed those signs because people had decided the times have changed. Our public policy has changed, so therefore these signs are no longer needed, no longer wanted. Now, one could argue, yeah, well, the law compelled removal of these signs, but who compelled the law? Answer: the people. So therefore, the people always make changes when they see that we are behind the times in terms of what we expose to the public, to our public.
Donna, would you agree with me that the Historical Commission has essentially just been absent from these discussions? What they said was, after the law was passed, that they wanted more information, so they delayed doing anything there. And then they came back and just said that they were bound to follow the law and have not been involved in the decisions about Silent Slam, the statue in Chatham. Could they have been more helpful in this?
Possibly, but really the public dispute and debate over this kind of overtook anything to do with the Historical Commission. We can't hide from really ugly, terrible pieces of our history. And so I agree with Cash that we need to provide more historical context. I don't know if a museum is the right place to do it, but the answer is more information and more discussion. My husband went to school with the children of Japanese American citizens who, in the early 1940s under FDR, were rounded up and put in prison camps.
Oh, yes.
In my home state of Arizona, there's a town called Poston in which one of those camps existed. Right. Reprehensible looking back.
Yeah, another not so bright
but we
dime.
Can't hide from any of it. And this has brought forth a situation where we have to be willing to talk, and we have to understand the context of the time, and then the cultural changes and shifts that have led us to a more enlightened view.
Part of the issue on this statue in Chatham County was who owns the statue.
Correct.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy had made a gift to the county to place that statue on county courthouse property. Now, the question is, was it a gift making a public monument, or was it in fact continued to be owned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy and not subject to that 2015 law we talked about? What's your response to that?
There's some language in the context of the gift that made that ambiguous, and that's the reason why they could ultimately do this. If it had been ruled unambiguously state property, then that law would have applied and Chatham couldn't have taken the statue out.
So far as it goes, we've talked about this, Chris, but there's pain on both sides. It's fairly obvious that both sides of this disagreement have some pain so far as the past is concerned. Donna says we've got to get together and talk about this. How do we resolve these issues?
I don't know. I mean, I think anybody would do that. I will say I live in Chatham County, and I'm happy that when I go to Pittsburgh now, I don't have to walk by a monument that was not put up right after the Civil War, that was put up because they were the Jim Crow era.
100 years.
Absolutely, and Cash is exactly right about we've got to come to grips with our history in a much better way. We do need to have discussions about it. I think the law that the legislature passed was absurd, and I think the Historical Commission is proving that to be the case. They're all for local control and local government control until local governments start doing things that offend their base. I think this should be a local government decision when possible.
All right. Speaking of changing subjects and moving bases, it's time for you to tell us something we don't know. John, we got about 2.5 minutes.
The tariff war with China has cost North Carolina tobacco growers about $250 million in sales over the last 2 years. And unlike other commodity businesses, they cannot get federal aid because they grow tobacco.
Wow. Donna, tell us something we don't know.
It's Thanksgiving time, so I thought I'd bring you a story about PEAS. PEAS stands for Pre-Education in Science, and we have 4 North Carolina universities who are going to be working on a $1 million federal grant to get preschool kids exposed to science so that when they get into elementary school, they won't be afraid of it. We've had a lot of work trying to get girls into the STEM fields.
Yes.
This grant will not leave boys behind.
Sounds like something to be thankful for. Cash, tell us something we don't know.
I just want to wish the NC Spin family and our viewers a happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas.
It is a time to be thankful.
Yes, sir.
No question about it. Chris.
I hate to spoil the goodwill, but I will. As we sit this morning, as we take this, President Donald Trump called into a Fox show and said that the Ukrainians have the email server that is the key to this whole conspiracy theory. And the reason that is significant is Richard Burr, and that Ukraine interfered in the election. Richard Burr from North Carolina, his committee chair issued a report that made it clear once again Russia interfered with the election. Richard Burr, I think, needs to speak up, by the way.
I think you misunderstand. It was about the emails about the Atlantic Coast pipeline that are in Ukraine.
Richard Burr needs to stand up. The country literally is hanging in the balance here.
It's a witch hunt.
You've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. While on that website, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and also to our YouTube channel. And join us next week when we have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, happy Thanksgiving. Stay informed and watch out for the spin.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.